So, ScreenPlay CCG just dropped a couple of days ago. It's a new free-to-play online card game in the veins of Hearthstone, MTG Arena, Shadowverse, all your favorites. It's cinema and movie-making themed, which is a new one on the market and one that I personally quite enjoy. To risk sounding a bit pretentious, I do consider myself a bit of a movie buff, or cinemaphile if you prefer your hobby names to sound like types of sex offenders. But apart from the novel, or perhaps I should say movie theme, ScreenPlay is also the only card game that goes so in-depth on a popular but underappreciated gameplay mechanic that truly doesn't hit the same way anywhere else. Let's take a look, shall we? So, when starting with ScreenPlay, you'll go through the tutorial and start crafting a deck of your choosing. You will choose 3 out of a multitude of available lead characters. They serve kind of like commanders in MTG Commander format, being characters you can play without ever needing to draw them. While at the same time they will provide you with various avenues towards victory, alternate win conditions of sorts that you will have to fulfill over the course of the match. They also give you access to the color or class mechanic equivalent called genre. You'll only be able to add to your deck cards belonging to the same genres that your leads belong to. And making use of all 3 is generally a good idea, as it doesn't impact the reliability of your deck the same way choosing 3 colors would in MTG. Of course, you might want to go deeper on some of them to chase those sweet synergies. You'll add to your deck the local variant of spell or instant cards, a couple of units, and what could be understood as enchantments or locations, and you're ready to head into battle. And when the match starts, the first immediately interesting idea is that you take turns simultaneously with the opponent. You can play cards, have them attack, which freezes them for 2 turns, disabling them for the time being, or have active cards perform, giving you victory points which you'd only otherwise get from having an active lead character card on the field and doing what their effect calls for. You will choose a couple of these actions and program your turn in advance, and your opponent will do the same. If you fill all 3 of your lead's counters with victory points, either through performing or doing the effect that's written on the card, you win. But the fascinating wrinkle, one that shapes the entirety of this game from beginning to end, is that all these actions utilize the same resource. You see, in each turn, both you and your opponent will get a number of frames. These are both used up by effects, serving as a resource similar to mana or energy in other games, but they also serve as a timeline for your pre-programmed actions. So if you use frames 1 and 2 to pay for a card, that card will cost 2 frames, but it will hit the field earlier than if you paid for it using frames 4 and 5, even though the cost is the same. Attacks and performing utilize the same mechanic, costing 2 frames each. So the decision-making of ScreenPlay is balanced between decisions of what to do, but also when to do it. There's a great deal of interactivity and risk-reward calculation involved as a result. If you schedule a unit to perform end of turn, you run the risk of it getting killed by your opponent's early attack. But maybe, just maybe, you can juke out your opponent by performing with an unlikely unit. Or make them choose between stopping your perform but hitting an unimportant unit, versus neutralizing a huge threat but allowing you to perform and get a victory point with your other one. There are even more added considerations on top of that. Sure, cards have frame costs and so do attacks, but some of them happen on different frames within the cost. To sound a bit less demented, here's an example. The card costs 3 and it enters on the 3rd frame of its cost. This card also costs 3, but it enters on the 1st frame of its cost. If we were in a tense situation where playing a card would net each of us our final victory point as a result of the effect of our leads, that's an important consideration. Whoever would play the 2nd card instead of the 1st would win in that scenario. And being able to attack on an earlier frame is also massive, since if a card scheduled to attack gets attacked earlier itself, it receives a stronger preemptive hit and is stunned, fully negating its attack. So there's a mental game there of trying to figure out your opponent's late attacks and attempting to preempt them with a smack from your early attackers. But this preemptive strike is not the only mechanic at your disposal if you're able to read your opponents like a book. You can also schedule your cards to dodge, giving them 2 frames of invulnerability. Crucially, if a card gets attacked during these, nothing bad happens to it, but your opponent's attacker still goes on cooldown. So if you think you can tell when and which target your opponent will attack, that read could have marvelous consequences for you. This kind of reminds me of an ancient CCG called Kongai that you could once play on Congregate. The game allowed you to switch between a roster of 3 characters mid-match to find favorable matchups, but if your opponent saw it coming, they could intercept, stopping the action and dealing damage at the same time. Coming out a victor out of that mind-reading contest was a marvelous feeling. One that's also present in competitive Pokemon, for example, where a major factor is your awareness of your opponent's options and intentions of switching out their active Pokemon with ones on the bench. ScreenPlay provides the same feeling for me. Since the actions where counterplay is possible are based more on open than hidden information, you know, for example, which of your opponent's creatures are currently able to attack and which of your own are able to be attacked. You're able to concentrate not on what your opponent will do, which most other card games concentrate on and also feels nice if you get it right, but carries a requirement of knowing your opponent's options before they are revealed, which is a form of game knowledge that's rather slow to build. Rather, you will concentrate on when they will do it. And unlike other card games with open information, there is that psych out factor involved. It becomes more psychological rather than computational, and many players find that more interesting. It's entirely possible for you to take suboptimal choices to trick your opponent and be rewarded for this. Finally, if you wanted to wrap your head around timing even more, the number of frames available increases throughout the game. It starts with 5, then it's 6, then it's 7, etc., changing the cadence of an average turn as the match progresses. There's also the tiebreak mechanic called Spotlight. It shifts from player to player every turn, causing the player who has it to act first if both players were to act on the same frame. So making sure you have Spotlight for your master stroke, doing that sort of combo, is probably going to be a thing occasionally, and taking that into account alongside all the plethora of other timing-based effects is bound to make you feel really, really smart, if it goes well at least. So that was ScreenPlay, the CCG centered around the idea of timing. I'm genuinely excited to play this one. For disclosure though, the company behind it used generative AI for some placeholder art, so my involvement with this will hinge on whether they remove it, at least from the final product. Anyway, I've been Simon from Games Deconstructed, thanks for watching, and click the video on screen right now if you'd like to understand card games better than your opponents. Bye!